I had exactly 3 minutes before the third course was served, and the most powerful man in Seoul became a memory. My hand shook as I tucked the silk napkin under the silver tray, the ballpoint ink on the hidden note feeling like it was burning through the fabric. Around me, the private club hummed with the quiet authority of men who moved mountains with a whisper, oblivious to the jagged edges of the betrayal unfolding in their midst. Outside, the rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but in here, the silence was what was deafening. I looked at table 4. Kang Jae-Hwan sat like a king carved from obsidian, his silver hair catching the amber glow of the chandeliers. He was perfectly composed, listening more than he spoke, unaware that the woman touching his hand, his fiancée, Yoon Se-rin, had just ordered his execution in the shadows of the powder room. 10 minutes ago, I was invisible, just a girl in a crisp white apron. Now I was the only thing standing between him and the grave. The walk from the service station to the VIP lounge felt like a march toward a firing squad. Every squeak of my shoes on the polished marble sounded like a gunshot. To my left, I could see the security detail, men with earpieces and cold eyes scanning the room for threats. Yet they were looking for guns, not a folded piece of paper carried by a girl they didn't even bother to name. Yoon Se-rin turned her head as I approached, her gaze sharp and suspicious. She was elegant, draped in a dress that cost more than my father's medical bills, but her eyes were distant, secretive. She adjusted her diamond earring, a gesture I now knew was a signal. She looked at me, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone who had already buried the person she was looking at. "The wine is a bit late, isn't it?" Se-rin remarked, her voice like velvet-wrapped razor wire. "My apologies, ma'am," I murmured, keeping my chin tucked. I focused on the decanter, my heart kicking against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack bone. I could feel Jae-Hwan's presence, a heavy, pressurized weight. He didn't look at me. His focus was on a document, his fingers drumming a slow, predatory rhythm on the table. I reached for his glass. This was it. The glass wall between my world and theirs was about to shatter. As I refilled the dark red liquid, I used the tray as a shield to block Se-rin's line of sight. With a flick of my thumb, I slid the note from the napkin and pressed it against the base of his glass. I felt the friction of the paper meeting his hand. For a split second, Jae-Hwan's rhythm stopped. His fingers stilled. He didn't flinch, didn't look up, but I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. The air in the lounge, climate-controlled to perfection, suddenly felt arctic. "Is there anything else, Aisha?" Jae-Hwan asked. It was the first time he had ever used my name. His voice was a low, vibrating rasp that made the hair on my arms stand up. He knew. "No, sir," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the howl of the storm outside. I retreated, my reflection in the wine glasses looking ghost pale. I had crossed the line. I wasn't invisible anymore. As I reached the safety of the kitchen doors, I risked one last glance. Jae-Hwan was leaning back, his eyes fixed on Se-rin with a new lethal clarity, while his hand remained flat over the note. The betrayal was set, but for the first time in 30 years, the ghost of Seoul had an ally he never saw coming. The 3 minutes expired with the sudden sharp crack of a champagne cork at a nearby table, but the celebration was a lie. I was halfway to the kitchen doors when the atmosphere in the lounge curdled. Kang Jae-Hwan didn't look at the note again. He didn't need to. His quiet authority had shifted into a predatory stillness that seemed to draw all the heat out of the room. He reached out, his hand moving with a slow, deliberate grace as he picked up his wine glass. It was the signal. "Jae-Hwan, darling, you haven't touched your drink," Se-rin murmured, her voice sweet enough to mask the scent of a funeral arrangement. She reached for her clutch, her fingers grazing the latch just as the first shadow moved by the kitchen entrance. Jae-Hwan didn't drink. He tilted the glass just enough to catch Se-Rin's reflection in the dark red liquid. Then he slammed the crystal down on the table. The sound was like a gavel. "The third course is cancelled," Jae-Hwan said, his voice a low, terrifying rasp that cut through the music. Before Se-Rin could scream, the floor-to-ceiling windows behind them exploded. It wasn't the hitman's bullets, it was Jae-Hwan's own counter-snipers. The world dissolved into a chaotic symphony of shattering glass and tactical shouts. I froze, my serving tray pressed against my chest like a useless shield as the glass wall of my life was blown into a million glittering shards. "The girl! Secure her!" Jae-Hwan's command roared over the din. I didn't have time to run. Two massive men in dark suits, their faces masks of professional lethality, materialized from the shadows of the service corridor. I felt my feet leave the polished marble as they swept me up, my tray clattering to the floor, forgotten amidst the expensive porcelain and blood. "Let me go!" I gasped, but my voice was swallowed by the sudden burst of automatic gunfire coming from the bar. "Keep your head down, Aisha," one of the guards grunted, his grip like iron around my waist. He didn't treat me like a victim, he treated me like a high-value asset, shielding my body with his own as he navigated the battlefield. Through the haze of smoke and the strobe light flashes of muzzles, I caught one last glimpse of the table. Jae-Hwan was standing, his silver hair a beacon in the carnage. He had Se-Rin by the wrist, his grip so tight her diamond bracelet had snapped, scattering fractured rainbows across the floor. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was a mask of pure, ugly terror as she realized the man she'd tried to execute was very much alive and far more dangerous than the men she'd hired to kill him. I was shoved through a heavy steel service door, the sounds of the club becoming muffled thuds against the metal. We were in the loading docks, the air sharp with the smell of exhaust and rain. A black armored SUV sat idling, its headlights cutting through the Seoul downpour like the eyes of a beast. "Get in," the guard ordered, practically tossing me into the leather interior. As the door slammed shut and the vehicle roared into motion, I sank into the seat, my breath hitching in my throat. My hands were stained with a mixture of spilled wine and ballpoint ink. I looked out the tinted window at the receding lights of the club. I had saved a monster, and in doing so, I had burned the only bridge back to my quiet, invisible life. The first strike was over, but as the SUV sped into the dark heart of the city, I realized I wasn't being rescued, I was being collected. The drive to the outskirts of Seoul was a blur of neon rain and the rhythmic thump of the armored SUV's engine. I sat in the back, small and trembling, my waitress uniform feeling like a costume that no longer fit the reality of my life. When the vehicle finally slowed, it wasn't at a police station or a hospital, but at the gates of a sprawling fortress of glass and dark stone that seemed to grow out of the mountainside. This was the ghost's lair, a place of clinical perfection and absolute silence. The guards led me through a foyer that smelled of rain and expensive cedar, finally stopping at a pair of heavy mahogany doors. They swung open to reveal a private study where the air felt pressurized, thick with the weight of unsaid things. Kang Jae-Hwan stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, his back to me. He had changed into a clean black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. The silver of his hair was the only light in the room. "Leave us," he commanded. His voice was a low, melodic vibration that seemed to settle in my very bones. The doors clicked shut, leaving me alone with the man I had just saved. For a long minute he didn't move. He simply stared out at the city he ruled, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable, his eyes two dark pools of lethal intelligence that searched my face as if looking for a hidden blade. "Table 4, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm.
He walked toward the desk and picked up the small, crumpled note, my note. He smoothed it out with a slow, deliberate grace. "Your handwriting is frantic, Aisha. You were terrified. You knew that if Seren or her associates saw you, your life would end before you reached the kitchen." I found my voice, though it sounded thin and fragile in the vast room. "I didn't do it for the risk. I did it because I heard her. I heard her order your death like she was ordering a bottle of wine." Jae-Hwan stepped closer, breaching the glass wall of my personal space. Up close, he was a mountain of quiet authority, his scent a mix of cold air and sandalwood. He leaned down, his gaze level with mine, forcing me to see the monster the world feared. "Why?" he whispered. The word was a demand, a jagged edge of curiosity. "I am not a good man, Aisha. I have built an empire on the things people whisper about in the dark. You are a girl who blends into the background, a girl with a life that is supposed to be simple. Why would you trade your safety for a man who has no heart left to give?" I lifted my chin, the radical honesty of my father's daughter rising to the surface despite my shaking hands. "Maybe I didn't do it for your heart, Mr. Kang. I did it because everyone else in that room was pretending not to see what was happening. I've spent my life being invisible, and I know what it feels like when the world decides you don't matter. I wouldn't let that happen to anyone, not even you." A flicker of something passed over his face, not quite a smile, but a softening of the granite mask. It was the first time I saw the quiet authority waver. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face before he drew it back, as if remembering his own lethality. "You have a dangerous sense of mercy, Aisha Monroe," he murmured, his voice dropping into a register that felt like a vow. "In my world, mercy is a debt, and right now, the king is in your debt. That makes you the most protected woman in this city, and the most hunted." He walked back to the window, the distance between us returning, but the connection remained. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was the girl who had looked at a monster and seen a man. And as I watched his silver hair catch the moonlight, I realized that the debt he spoke of was going to cost me everything. The silence in the study deepened, but the tension shifted from predatory to something far more haunting. Jae-Hwan remained by the desk, his eyes fixed on me as if I were a puzzle he was finally beginning to solve. He reached for a leather-bound folder, a dossier his men must have compiled in the hour since we left the club. He flipped it open, the fluorescent light of the desk lamp catching the silver in his hair. "Aisha Monroe," he murmured, the name sounding different when he said it with intention. He looked at the page, then back at me, his brow furrowing in a rare display of genuine surprise. "Your father's name was Elias, wasn't it? Elias Monroe. He worked the international docks in Doosan 20 years ago." I felt a jolt of electricity go through me. "How do you know my father's name? He was just a foreman, a man who kept his head down and his boots clean." Jae-Hwan didn't answer immediately. He stepped toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. The quiet authority he wore like armor suddenly felt heavy with the weight of the past. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face before he drew it back, settling instead on the back of a chair. "Elias Monroe was never just anything, Aisha," he said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register. "When I was 20 years old, a hot-headed soldier in a war I didn't understand, my own father threw me to the wolves. He sent me to the docks to learn how to lead or to die. Everyone saw a target. Everyone saw a spoiled prince who needed to be broken, except for Elias." The air in the room seemed to grow cold as the memories took hold. I watched the granite mask of the Mafia king soften, replaced by the look of a man who had once been a student. Your father taught me that power isn't in the shout, it's in the whisper, Jae-Hwan continued, his gaze drifting toward the window. He taught me that a true leader is the one who notices the man sweeping the floor as much as the one holding the gun. He called it the weight of silence. He was the first person who didn't fear me, and because of that, he was the only one I ever truly listened to. I felt a lump form in my throat. I remembered my father's hands, rough, calloused, but always gentle when he tucked me in. I remember him telling me that being invisible wasn't a curse, but a vantage point. "He's gone now," I whispered, the grief sharp and fresh despite the years. "He was never forgotten," Jae-Hwan countered, his eyes snapping back to mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Every move I've made in this city, every bridge I've built or burned, I did with his voice in the back of my head. I've spent decades looking for a way to repay a debt to a man who refused to take a single won from me." He stepped closer, breaching the space between us until I could feel the heat radiating from him. The monster the world feared was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he had just found a ghost. "You didn't save me tonight by accident, Aisha. You saved me because you are his blood. You have his eyes, the eyes that see the betrayal before the blade is even drawn." He reached out, and this time he didn't draw back. His thumb grazed the line of my jaw, a gesture of reverence that felt like a vow. "The world thinks I am in your debt because of a note. They don't realize I've been in your family's debt for a lifetime, and I intend to pay it back by making sure the woman who saved the king becomes the queen of everything he built." The weight of his words settled over me, a golden cage of protection and legacy. I wasn't just a waitress who had overheard a secret. I was the legacy of the man who had shaped the ghost of Seoul. And as the storm continued to howl outside, I realized that my invisibility was officially over. I was finally seen. And in Jae-Hwan's eyes, I was the only truth left in a world of lies. The days following the strike at the club felt like living in a gilded morgue. The mansion was silent, but the air was heavy with the scent of lilies and the lingering chill of unstated threats. Se-Rin had not been executed. Instead, she was kept in a state of high society house arrest in the West Wing, a ghost of the woman she had once been, yet far more dangerous in her desperation. She had survived the initial purge by playing the victim, claiming she was coerced by the rival syndicate, and now she began her psychological war with me with the precision of a surgeon. I was in the conservatory, trying to lose myself in the rows of orchids when I felt her shadow fall across the glass. Se-Rin stood in the doorway, her pale blue silk gown shimmering like ice. She didn't look like a traitor. She looked like a grieving widow, her eyes expertly rimmed with red. "You think you're special because you carry his mentor's blood, don't you?" she asked, her voice a fragile, trembling reed. She walked toward me, her heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic warning on the stone floor. "You think he brought you here because of a debt, but Jae-Hwan doesn't believe in debts. He believes in utility." I kept my hands busy with the pruning shears, refusing to let her see my palms sweating. "I'm here because I told him the truth, something you seem to have forgotten how to do." Se-Rin laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Truth is a perspective in this house. Did you know that 3 of his men were found dead this morning? Information leaked from inside these walls. Information about the shipment routes your father once managed." She stepped closer, her perfume, that expensive floral scent that now smelled like a funeral arrangement, filled my lungs. He's starting to wonder, why a girl who was invisible for 20 years suddenly has the ability to see beyond the walls.
Appears the moment his world begins to burn. It's a classic play, Aisha. The heroine who creates the fire just so she can save the king. She wasn't just talking to me, she was planting seeds. I knew Jae-Hwan's security cameras were watching every corner of this room. She was painting a masterpiece of suspicion, using my father's legacy as the brush. Later that evening, the tension reached a breaking point. I was summoned to the dining hall, but the table was empty save for Jae-Hwan. He sat at the head, his silver hair catching the low light of the candles. He was unreadable, his focus on a file that I recognized, the dossier on the morning's casualties. Seirin was already there, hovering in the shadows like a poisonous moth. "I told you, Jae-Hwan," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. She knew the codes. She knew the history. Who else would know the weakness of the Busan docks but the daughter of the man who built them? Jae-Hwan didn't look up. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. He simply looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine with a lethal intelligence that felt like a blade against my throat. The quiet authority was back, and this time it was aimed at me. "Aisha," he said, his voice a low, vibrating rasp, "my men tell me you were seen near the communications room an hour before the leak. Seirin tells me you've been asking questions about the old dock ledgers." The air in the room became arctic. I realized then that the fiancée shadow was a trap I hadn't seen coming. She didn't need to kill me with a gun. She only had to make me a stranger again. "I was looking for my father's journals, Jae-Hwan," I said, my voice steady despite the hammer of my heart against my ribs. I stepped into the light, crossing the glass wall of his suspicion. "She's trying to make you see a spy because she can't stand that you see a woman. You can believe the woman who tried to kill you, or you can believe the girl who risked her life to save you. But don't you dare insult my father's memory by suggesting his daughter would sell his honor for a shipment of blood." Jae-Hwan's fingers stilled on the file. He looked from me to the trembling Seirin, then back to me. The silence stretched, a countdown that felt like an execution. Finally, he closed the folder. "Leave us, Seirin," he commanded. As she slunk away, her face a mask of thwarted malice, Jae-Hwan stood. He didn't apologize, but he reached out, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw with that familiar, heavy reverence. "The shadows are long in this house, Aisha. Be careful not to get lost in them." The war had moved from the docks to the mind, and as I looked into the ghost of Seoul's eyes, I realized that surviving the betrayal was only the beginning. Now I had to survive the love. The walls of the estate were masterpieces of glass and steel, but to me they were beginning to feel like the bars of a golden cage. A week had passed since Jae-Hwan had dismissed Seirin's accusations, yet the freedom I thought I'd earned felt more like a controlled environmental study. I was no longer a waitress, but I wasn't quite a guest either. I was a protected variable in a lethal equation, and the weight of that protection was starting to crush me. Every time I tried to walk the perimeter of the gardens, a shadow followed, always 3 paces behind, always armed, always silent. The quiet authority that Jae-Hwan projected over the city was now the air I breathed. My world had shrunk from the vibrant, chaotic streets of Seoul to 6,000 square feet of marble and echoing hallways. "You're pacing again," Jae-Hwan's voice drifted from the balcony above the courtyard. I looked up. He was silhouetted against the gray afternoon sky, looking like a dark god presiding over a kingdom of one. He descended the stone stairs with that rhythmic, predatory grace that used to terrify me. Now it just made my heart ache with a complicated sort of resentment. "I need to go to the hospital, Jae-Hwan," I said, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the estate.
My father's old partner is there. I have things of his, journals, letters, that I need to collect from my old apartment. I can't just exist in this vacuum." Jae-Hwan reached the bottom step and stopped, his presence creating a localized storm of intensity. The world outside these gates is currently hunting for the girl who saved me. Seiren's allies haven't disappeared, they've simply gone underground. To them, you are the reason their coup failed. You are the only weakness they can find in me. "So I'm a prisoner?" I challenged, stepping into his space, crossing the invisible line that his guards never dared to breach. "You're keeping me in a vault like one of your vintage wines? My father taught you about the weight of silence, Jae-Hwan, but he didn't teach you to turn people into ghosts." His jaw tightened, a fracture appearing in the granite mask. He reached out, his fingers grazing the silk of my sleeve, clothing he had bought in a house he owned under a life he now dictated. "I am keeping you alive," he whispered, his voice a low, vibrating rasp. "Is there a difference?" I countered. "I spent my life being invisible because I had to be. Now I'm invisible because you've hidden me away. I saved you so you could keep ruling, not so you could build a cage for me." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the glass eaves. I saw the struggle in his eyes, the instinct to control battling the reverence he felt for the daughter of his mentor. He was used to commanding empires, but he had no idea how to handle a woman who refused to be a piece on his chessboard. "You want to go back to your apartment?" he finally asked, his voice dropping into a register of dangerous concession. "Fine, but you go with my team. You stay in the car. You don't touch the ground." "I want to walk my own stairs, Jae-Hwan. I want to feel the city without a bulletproof vest." He stepped closer, his scent of cold rain and sandalwood suddenly overwhelming. He leaned down, his forehead almost touching mine. "The war you started when you slipped me that note is just beginning, Aisha. You wanted to be seen, fine, but once you step out of this cage, the whole world will see you, and they will try to take you from me just to see if I bleed." I looked into his dark eyes and realized the terrifying truth. The golden cage wasn't just to keep the world out, it was to keep me in, because the Mafia king had finally found something he was too afraid to lose. I was safe, but as the gates hummed open to let the armored convoy through, I realized that the cost of his protection was my soul. The air in my old apartment was stagnant, smelling of dust and the faint, lingering scent of my father's tobacco. Jae-Hwan's men stood like statues in the hallway, their presence a jarring intrusion of violence into a space that had once been my only sanctuary. I moved through the small living room, my fingers tracing the worn spine of a photo album, feeling the weight of the golden cage even here. I wasn't looking for memories, though. I was looking for the truth Aisha Monroe died protecting. In the back of the closet, tucked behind a loose floorboard only a dock worker's daughter would know how to find, sat a small metal lockbox. I expected to find old ledgers or perhaps a few thousand won saved for a rainy day. Instead, I found a burner phone, still charged by some miracle of high-end electronics, and a digital drive encrypted with the seal of the International Maritime Syndicate. As I sat on the edge of my twin bed, a blue light of the screen illuminating my ghost-pale face, the Judas reveal began to unfold. It wasn't just a local coup. Seiren Yoon hadn't just wanted Jae-Hwan dead for power. She was the architect of a much larger liquidation. The drive contained a series of high-resolution scans, Jae-Hwan's private security codes, the GPS coordinates of his offshore accounts, and the names of every undercover operative he had embedded in the rival families. She was selling him, piece by piece. I scrolled through the messages, my breath hitching as I realized the scale of the betrayal. Seirin had been in contact with an international buyer for months, promising them the ghost of Seoul on a silver platter in exchange for a seat at a table far larger than the park syndicate. The third course at the restaurant hadn't just been an assassination attempt. It was supposed to be the final confirmation of the sale. "Aisha, we need to move. The perimeter is compromised." The guard's voice through the door was a low, urgent rasp. I pocketed the drive, my heart thundering against my ribs. I had been worried about Jae-Hwan's suspicion, but this was far worse. This was an extinction event. If this information reached the open market, Jae-Hwan wouldn't just lose his throne, he would be erased, and everyone associated with him, including me, would be hunted to the ends of the earth. As we sprinted down the narrow back stairs, the sound of screeching tires echoed from the street below. Seirin's allies were no longer hiding in the shadows, they were coming to reclaim the product she had promised them. Through the small window of the stairwell, I saw a black sedan block our exit. I looked at the drive in my hand, the Judas reveal feeling like a live grenade. Jae-Hwan had told me that the war I started was just beginning, but he didn't realize that his fiancée had already signed his death warrant in a language he couldn't speak. I wasn't just the girl who had overheard a secret anymore. I was the keeper of the keys to his kingdom. The armored SUV roared to meet us at the curb, the quiet authority of Jae-Hwan's men shifting into high-gear tactical defense. As I was shoved into the back seat, the first shots rang out, shattering the windshield of a parked car. I looked at the dark tinted glass and knew that the golden cage was about to become a war room. I had saved a monster once with a note. Now I had to save an empire with a secret. As we sped back toward the mountain estate, I realized that the woman I had been, the invisible waitress, was officially dead. The survivor had taken her place, and she was ready to burn Seirin's world to the ground to keep the king alive. The scent of the Busan docks was a visceral memory. Diesel, salt air, and the metallic tang of rested shipping containers. It was the world my father had built, a labyrinth of iron where I had played as a child, while he managed the flow of the city's lifeblood. Now that same labyrinth was the staging ground for Jae-Hwan's execution. The international syndicate, guided by Seirin's stolen data, had funneled their forces into the old North Kui, believing they had the ghost of Seoul pinned against the water. Jae-Hwan stood behind the reinforced door of a concrete warehouse, his silver hair ghost-pale against the darkness. His quiet authority was now a cold, tactical engine. He looked at the digital drive I had recovered, then at the sprawling network of cranes and gantries outside. He knew his men were outnumbered 3-1. "They have the thermal perimeter locked," Jae-Hwan whispered, his voice a low, vibrating rasp. I looked at the rusted service hatch in the floor, a hidden maintenance crawlway my father had shown me years ago, one that didn't exist on any modern blueprint Seirin could have sold. "They're watching for soldiers, Jae-Hwan. They aren't watching for a shadow." "Aisha, no. It's too late for heroics." He reached for my arm, his grip firm but laced with a rare, jagged edge of fear. "I'm not being a hero," I countered, leaning into his space, the radical honesty of my father's daughter burning in my eyes. "I'm being invisible, just like my father taught. I can reach the control tower through the sublevels. If I can override the floodlights and the crane locks, their thermal advantage disappears. You'll have your opening." For a heartbeat, the Mafia king and the waitress were the only two people in the world. He searched my face, looking for the girl who had trembled at table 4, and found instead the woman who had walked through his fire. He let go of my arm, his hand rising to grace the line of my jaw in a silent, heavy vow. 3 minutes, Aisha. If the lights don't go, I'm coming in after you." I slipped into the crawlway, the damp heat of the sublevels swallowing me whole. I moved with a rhythmic, practiced grace, navigating the old bones of the docks that Seirin had dismissed as obsolete. I was a ghost in the machinery. I passed beneath the boots of enemy mercenaries, hearing their sharp foreign commands through the steel grating above. They were looking for a war. They didn't see the girl in the dark. I reached the control tower's manual override, a rusted lever tucked behind a transformer bank. My hands didn't shake this time. I thought of the Judas reveal, the way Seiren had tried to sell Jae-Hwan's soul, and I felt a cold, sharp resolve. I threw the lever. The docks erupted. The massive industrial floodlights didn't just turn on, they strobed with a high-intensity frequency I'd programmed from the drive. The automated cranes groaned to life, swinging empty containers into the sniper's lines of sight. The final restoration had begun. Through the tower glass, I saw the black-clad figure of Jae-Hwan break cover. He moved like a storm, his silver hair a streak of lethal light as he utilized the chaos I'd created. He wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for the woman who had refused to let him be erased. The international syndicate's clean shot was gone. In the blinding light and shifting shadows, the ghost of Seoul reclaimed his territory with a brutality that left no room for mercy. I watched from the heights as the threat that had loomed over us was dismantled piece by piece by the man I had saved with a note and redeemed with a secret. The docks were silent once more, but the air was no longer stagnant. It was clean. It was ours.